What happens when the world's most powerful woman, a billionaire CEO still mourning her husband, makes an announcement that stuns the globe? Cassandra Reyes, the ice queen of the tech industry, declares she will marry the next man who can beat her in a game of chess. The challenge is a tribute to her late grandmaster husband, a fortress she's built around her heart. Thousands try, from tycoons to chess champions, and all of them fail. But then, a challenger no one expected walks in a quiet, unassuming single father from Brooklyn, with worn-out shoes and a past he's long since buried. He isn't there for her money or her fame. And when he plays the final winning move, his response to her shocking proposal will unravel everything she thought she knew about love loss and the true meaning of victory. The air in the Ethelred Innovations Grand Auditorium crackled with the kind of energy usually reserved for a product launch that promised to change the world. Instead of a sleek new device, however, the monolithic screen behind the podium displayed a stark, elegant chessboard. At the podium stood Cassandra Reyes, the formidable CEO and grieving widow who had inherited not just an empire, but the ghost of a legend. It had been 2 years since her husband Daniel Ferrer, a chess grandmaster of breathtaking genius, had been taken by a sudden illness. In those 2 years, Cassandra had transformed. The warmth she once shared freely was encased in a shell of cool, professional brilliance. She'd tripled Ethelred's valuation, her strategic mind operating with the ruthless precision of a chess algorithm. She was respected, feared, and profoundly alone. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice calm and measured, yet it carried to the furthest corners of the packed room. Reporters leaned forward, microphones poised like hungry vipers. Ethelred has always been about solving the impossible, about seeing the patterns others miss. My late husband, Daniel, saw the world in the same way. To him, life, business, love. It was all a grand chess match, a beautiful complex series of moves and counter-moves. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned the audience, betraying nothing. Daniel believed a person's true character is revealed not in victory, but in the strategy they employ under pressure. He was my king and I his queen. A flicker of something pain memory crossed her features before vanishing. I have spent the last 2 years securing his legacy and building this company. Now I intend to address my own future. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was unexpected. Her private life was a black box. I have no interest in the conventional methods of courtship, she continued, her tone sharpening. The sycophants, the gold diggers, the men who see a merger instead of a marriage. I seek an equal, an intellectual partner, someone who understands the beauty of a well-executed plan. She gestured to the board behind her. Therefore, I am issuing a challenge. It is open to any man, regardless of status or wealth. The challenge is simple. Beat me in a game of classical chess. The room erupted. Shouts and questions overlapped in a cacophony of disbelief. Cassandra raised a hand, and silence fell instantly. The rules are clear. A series of preliminary online qualifiers will determine the top 16 challengers. They will be flown to New York to compete in a tournament with the final opponent facing me. The prize for winning is not money. It is not a position at my company. She took a breath, her gaze unwavering. Beat me in chess and I will marry you. Pandemonium. Cameras flashed like a lightning storm. The headline was born in that instant, a viral supernova that would dominate the news cycle for weeks, the billionaire's gambit. Her chief of security and longtime confidant, a stern man named Robert Peterson, watched from the wings, his face a mask of disapproval. Cassandra, this is madness. He'd argued that morning in her sterile white penthouse overlooking Central Park. You are turning your life into a circus. You're inviting every predator and lunatic on the planet to your doorstep. Daniel once told me that to find a king, a queen must sometimes force the entire board into motion. She had replied, adjusting the cuff of her bespoke blazer. I am tired of the silence, Robert. This is a move, a logical, albeit unconventional one. In the days that followed, Peterson's prediction proved both right and wrong. The world did descend. Tech moguls from Silicon Valley, arrogant hedge fund managers from Wall Street, and even a handful of legitimate chess grandmasters, intrigued by the sheer audacity of it, all signed up. The media portrayed Cassandra as either a romantic genius or an unhinged eccentric. For her, it was neither. It was a shield. The challenge was so impossibly high, the skill it required so specific, that she believed no one could ever truly meet it. It was a fortress disguised as an invitation, a way to remain publicly seeking while privately staying untouchable. Daniel was the only man who had ever been able to consistently challenge her, his brilliant intuitive play, a perfect foil to her cold, calculating logic. She wasn't looking for a new Daniel. She was proving to the world and to herself that he was irreplaceable. Each night, she would sit in her vast, silent home, a single glass of wine in her hand, and watch the online qualifiers. She saw aggressive, foolish attacks. She saw cautious, boring defenses. She saw brilliant players who crumbled under the pressure of the final few moves. She saw hundreds of men try to win a prize they didn't understand, and with each failure the walls around her heart grew a little thicker, a little more secure. She was safe. The queen was in her castle, and the board was hers to command. She was sure no one could ever checkmate her again. Miles away from the gleaming steel and glass of Midtown Manhattan, in a cramped but tidy third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, Nathaniel Nate Coleman was expertly losing a game of Go Fish. Got any sevens? His 8-year-old daughter Zoe asked, her brow furrowed in a theatrical display of intense concentration. Her small face, framed by a cascade of unruly brown curls, lit up as Nate sighed dramatically and handed over the card. You're a shark, kiddo. A regular card shark, he said, ruffling her hair. Daddy sharks don't play cards. She giggled a sound that was the undisputed center of his universe. Zoe was a whirlwind of bright questions and boundless energy, a stark contrast to the quiet, weary man who was her father. Nate's life was a carefully constructed routine. Wake up, get Zoe ready for school work. His shift as a freelance database analyst from their small living room, pick Zoe up, make dinner, read stories, and collapse into bed. His world was small, but it was full. He had once been someone else. A decade ago, the New York chess scene had whispered about a prodigy known only as the Ghost of Greenwich Village. A young man who would appear in Washington Square Park, play a dozen games of speed, chess simultaneously, win them all with a quiet, unnerving grace, and then disappear before anyone could learn his name. He saw the board not as 64 squares, but as a living, breathing landscape of infinite possibilities. He played with a creative, almost reckless intuition that baffled traditionalists. He'd been on a trajectory toward greatness with whispers of a grandmaster title before he was 25. And then he had vanished, not for fame or money, but for Zoe. Her mother had left when Zoe was just a baby, overwhelmed and unready. Nate hadn't hesitated. He'd traded the thrill of the checkmate for the warmth of a tiny hand in his. He packed away his chess sets, unsubscribed from the journals, and poured every ounce of his strategic mind into navigating single fatherhood on a shoestring budget. That evening, after Zoe was asleep, Nate was scrolling through a news feed on his laptop, looking for new data entry gigs, when a sensational headline caught his eye. The Billionaire's Gambit, Final 16th announced. He'd seen the initial story weeks ago and dismissed it as a publicity stunt, another bizarre spectacle of the ultra-rich. But curiosity got the better of him. He clicked. The article featured a photo of Cassandra Reyes. She was beautiful, but it was a cold, statuesque beauty. What held his attention were her eyes. He recognized the look in them instantly. It was the same look he'd seen in the eyes of the greatest chess players he'd ever faced, a piercing intelligence, a constant calculation, and a profound, unbreachable loneliness. This wasn't a game to her. This was a fortress. He scrolled through the list of finalists. A tech billionaire, a Swedish grandmaster, a Wall Street analyst known for his aggressive tactics, all sharks circling. He closed the laptop, a strange disquiet settling over him. He felt a pang of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, the itch of a puzzle, unsolved, the pull of a worthy opponent. The next day, a letter arrived that shattered his carefully constructed peace. It was from Zoe's specialist. Her asthma, usually manageable, had been worsening. The doctor was recommending a new experimental treatment program. It was promising with a high success rate, but it was also astronomically expensive, far beyond what his meager insurance would cover. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He'd always managed. He'd cut corners, worked late nights, and sold his grandfather's watch. But this was a figure he couldn't comprehend. He spent the night staring at the ceiling, his mind racing, calculating odds, running scenarios. Every path led to a dead end. The following morning, bleary-eyed, he turned on the local news. A segment was running on the Billionaire's Gambit. One of the final 16, a hedge fund manager, had been disqualified due to a cheating scandal in the online qualifiers. His spot was now open. The tournament organizers were holding a one-day, last-chance open call qualifier at the New York Chess and Game Club to fill the final slot. It was that very day. Nate looked from the television to the doctor's letter on his coffee table, then to the photograph of Zoe grinning with a missing front tooth. He wasn't a predator. He had no interest in Cassandra Reyes's life or her hand in marriage. The very idea was absurd. But the tournament rules he'd read stipulated that all 16 finalists would receive a stipend of $50,000 for their participation, regardless of whether they won or lost. $50,000. It wasn't the full amount for Zoe's treatment, but it was a start. It was hope. It was a lifeline. He looked at his hands, which had once moved across a chessboard with the fluid grace of a concert pianist. They were softer now, accustomed to keyboards and tying shoelaces. Could he still do it? Could he resurrect the ghost? He opened the hall closet and reached into the back behind the old coats and a box of Zoe's outgrown toys. His fingers brushed against the smooth, worn wood of a small, unadorned box. He pulled it out and blew off a layer of dust. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a set of Staunton chess pieces. The Black King felt cool and familiar in his palm. For the first time in nearly a decade, Nate Coleman set up a chessboard. Not for love, not for glory, but for his daughter. He was about to step back onto a battlefield he had long since abandoned, with stakes higher than any championship title. The New York Chess and Game Club was a hallowed space, smelling of old wood lemon polish and the quiet intensity of 1,000 silent battles. When Nate walked in, he felt a decade of self-imposed exile melt away. He was invisible, just another face in a sea of hopefuls, and he preferred it that way. His clothes were simple jeans and a worn grey sweater, a stark contrast to the tailored shirts and confident smirks of the other players who had come to seize their last chance at fame and fortune. He paid the entry fee with a crumpled bill and was assigned a number 217. As he waited for the tournament to begin, he could hear the whispers around him, all centered on Cassandra Reyes. "They say she's a machine, plays like a supercomputer," one young player said to another. "It's a publicity stunt. She'll probably have an earpiece with Magnus Carlsen feeding her moves." The other scoffed. Nate knew better. He had rewatched the press conference late last night, studying her posture, the cadence of her speech, the briefest flicker of pain in her eyes when she mentioned her husband. This wasn't a stunt. This was an elegy. She wasn't playing for publicity. She was playing to prove no one could fill the void Daniel Ferrer had left. He understood in a way these other men couldn't, that to beat her, you had to understand not just her strategy, but her grief. The tournament was a brutal, rapid-fire affair. Each game was timed, forcing quick, decisive action. Nate moved through the early rounds like a phantom. His opponents, seeing his unassuming appearance, underestimated him. They played aggressively, trying to overwhelm him, but his defense was like water yielding, absorbing their attacks, and then closing in when they overextended. He didn't play for flashy checkmates. He played for quiet, inevitable advantages. He won his first game, then his second, then his third. By the fourth round, people started to notice. A small crowd gathered around his board. Whispers began to circulate. "Who is that guy? I don't know, but he just dismantled Jerry Chen in 20 moves. Look at his clock. He's barely used any time." Nate ignored them. He was in the zone, that sacred mental space where the outside world faded and only the 64 squares remained. The pieces weren't wood and felt. They were forces, ideas, possibilities. He wasn't just Nate Coleman, single dad from Brooklyn. He was the ghost. And he was home. His final opponent for the qualifying spot was a brash, arrogant player named Vincent Gallo, a semi-professional, known for his psychological tactics and condescending chatter during matches. "Tough luck making it this far just to get sent home, buddy," Vincent sneered as they set up their pieces. "Don't worry, the missus will understand." Nate said nothing, his focus entirely on the board. He chose to play as black. Vincent opened with an aggressive King's Gambit, a risky but powerful opening designed to intimidate. Nate responded with a calm, solid defense, countering each of Vincent's threats with quiet precision. The game became a tense, protracted war. Vincent, growing frustrated by Nate's unbreakable defense, started making small, impatient mistakes. Nate patiently capitalized on each one, building a subtle, almost invisible advantage. The final moments were a masterclass in quiet dominance. Nate sacrificed his rook in a move that made Vincent grin, thinking it was a blunder, but it was a trap. 3 moves later, Vincent's king was hopelessly cornered. Checkmate. A stunned silence fell over the crowd, followed by a ripple of applause. Vincent Gallo stared at the board, his face pale with disbelief. Nate simply offered a quiet nod, packed his pieces, and stood to leave. As he headed for the exit, a man in a sharp suit intercepted him. It was Robert Peterson, Cassandra's head of security. His face was grim, his eyes analytical and suspicious. "Mr. Coleman." Peterson said, his voice low and firm. "Quite a performance." "I just play the game," Nate replied, his hand already on the door. "Many people play the game. Few do it with the efficiency you just displayed. Yet there is no record of a Nathaniel Coleman in any major chess federation database for the past 10 years. You appear out of nowhere and beat one of the city's top players. Forgive my skepticism, but Ms. Reyes's challenge has attracted all sorts of opportunists." Nate met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "My daughter needed new shoes." Peterson's eyes narrowed, searching for a hint of deception. The finalist's stipend is $50,000. That's a lot of shoes. She has expensive taste, Nate said, with a ghost of a smile, turning to leave. You will be subject to a thorough background check, Mr. Coleman, Peterson called after him. We will find out who you are. I'm a father from Brooklyn, Nate said over his shoulder without looking back. That's all you need to know. He stepped out into the evening air, the sounds of the city, a welcome return to reality. He had done it. He had secured the money. He could call the doctor tomorrow and get Zoe into the program. That should have been the end of it. He could forfeit the main tournament, take the stipend, and disappear back into his quiet life. But as he rode the subway back to Brooklyn, the image of Cassandra Reyes's face returned to him. He thought about the fortress she had built, the impossible challenge she had laid down. He had solved the first part of the puzzle. He had earned his place at the board. And a part of him, the part he had suppressed for a decade, couldn't bear to walk away from the game now. He wasn't just playing for the money anymore. He was playing for the sheer, beautiful, terrible challenge of it. He was playing against the Queen. The Ethelred Innovations Tower was a monument to modern ambition, a spear of glass and steel piercing the New York skyline. The grand finals of the Billionaire's Gambit were held in the Starlight Atrium on the 80th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the city, a glittering carpet of lights that seemed to stretch into infinity. The setting was designed to intimidate, to reinforce the sheer scale of Cassandra Reyes's world. Nate, dressed in a simple dark suit provided by the organizers, felt utterly out of place. The other finalists whittled down to him, and Cassandra had all been eliminated in the preceding days. He had dispatched them with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown at the club, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the high-stakes pressure cooker of the tournament. Now it was just him. The room was filled with the world's media. The hushed clicks of cameras sounded like a congregation of metallic insects. A large digital screen displayed a live feed of the chessboard, a magnificent custom-made marble and obsidian set that sat on a table in the center of the room. Cassandra entered, and a wave of silence washed over the room. She was wearing a simple but exquisitely tailored black dress, her dark hair pulled back in a severe chignon. She looked less like a CEO and more like a monarch arriving for a state ceremony. Her face was an impassive mask, but as her eyes met Nate's across the room, he saw a flicker of something, curiosity, perhaps even a hint of respect. He was the anomaly, the variable she hadn't accounted for. They took their seats. The arbiter, a stern-faced international official, recited the rules, but Nate barely heard him. His entire focus was on the woman opposite him. He had Peterson's background check file on his desk at home, a thick manila folder that had arrived by courier a few days prior. He hadn't opened it. He didn't want to know about her net worth or her business dealings. He wanted to learn about her here, across these 64 squares. They shook hands. Her grip was firm, her hand cool. "Good luck, Mr. Coleman," she said, her voice a low murmur. "And to you, Ms. Reyes," he replied. The clock was started. Cassandra playing as white opened with 1d4, the Queen's Gambit. Of course, it was her signature opening in business and apparently in chess, a move of control, of claiming the center, of offering a sacrifice to gain a long-term strategic advantage. Nate responded with 1d5, declining the gambit. A quiet refusal. "I will not play your game on your terms." The first hour was a silent, intricate dance. Cassandra played with textbook precision, her moves flawless, logical, and cold. She built pressure methodically, like a python constricting its prey. She was trying to suffocate him, to force him into a mistake. The media commentators broadcasting live praised her technical mastery. Nate, however, was patient. He absorbed the pressure his pieces arranged in a flexible, resilient defense. He wasn't trying to win, not yet. He was listening. He was learning her rhythm, the cadence of her thoughts. He saw the ghost of her husband, Daniel, in her play, the solid, classical principles he was known for. But he also saw her own additions, a layer of ruthless, almost cruel efficiency. It was as if she had taken his beautiful music and stripped it of all emotion, leaving only the perfect, cold structure behind. 2 hours in the game was perfectly balanced. It was a masterpiece of tension, a coiled spring. The crowd was mesmerized by the sheer intensity of their silent battle. Then Cassandra made her move. She launched a calculated attack on his king side, a complex series of moves she had clearly prepared and analyzed beforehand. It was brilliant, a stunning combination that would have shattered a lesser player. The commentators gasped. This was it, the killing blow. Nate leaned forward, his eyes tracing the lines of force on the board. He saw the attack coming, of course. But he also saw the emotional core of it. It was a move born of impatience, of a desire to end things, to prove her superiority, and be done with this whole spectacle. It was the move of a woman who was tired of being vulnerable, and in that impatience he found his opening. A tiny, almost imperceptible flaw in the glittering diamond of her attack. He didn't defend. Instead, he moved a pawn, a single, humble pawn, on the opposite side of the board. It seemed like an insane, irrelevant move. The commentators were baffled. The audience murmured in confusion. Cassandra froze. Her composure for the first time cracked. She stared at the pawn, then back at her own ferocious attack. She had been so focused on her own plan, her own narrative of the game, that she hadn't seen it. Nate's pawn move didn't stop her attack, not directly. Instead, it started a quiet, lethal counterattack of his own. It was a whisper against her shout, but it was a whisper that would prove fatal. She was forced into a terrible choice: continue her assault and allow his counterattack to dismantle her position, or abandon her brilliant plan to deal with his single insolent pawn. The logic of her position was collapsing. The next hour was agony for her. She tried to salvage the game, her mind a powerful supercomputer, running trillions of calculations. But Nate's intuitive play had thrown a wrench into her machine. He met her every move with a quiet, elegant solution. He wasn't playing against her pieces anymore. He was playing against her crumbling certainty. The end came subtly without a dramatic flourish. After a grueling 5 hours, they reached a position where Cassandra's king was trapped in a mating net from which there was no escape. Any move she made would lead to checkmate within 3. Her shoulders slumped, a barely perceptible movement, but for a woman of her control, it was a seismic event. She looked up from the board, her eyes meeting Nate's. They were no longer stormy. They were clear, and in their depths he saw a shocking vulnerability. He saw not a queen, but a woman. She extended her hand across the board. "I resign," she said, her voice hoarse. The room exploded. Flashes erupted, reporters shouted questions. The world had just witnessed the impossible. The unassuming single dad from Brooklyn had defeated the untouchable queen. Robert Peterson stared stone-faced, unable to process what had just happened. Nate simply shook her hand, the warmth of his palm covering her cool one. He had won. He had checkmated the CEO. And now, according to her own proclamation, she was his. The press conference was convened less than an hour later. The atmosphere was electric. Nate and Cassandra sat at a long table, a forest of microphones between them. Nate felt like an animal in a zoo, the flash bulbs like lightning strikes in a cage. Cassandra, by contrast, had regained her composure. She was once again the CEO, poised, and in control, though a certain rigidity in her posture betrayed the turmoil beneath the surface. She spoke first, her voice even. As per the terms of the challenge I issued, Mr. Nathaniel Coleman has defeated me in a game of chess. It was a game of extraordinary skill, and I congratulate him on his victory. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. The world held its breath. Mr. Coleman, she said, her voice resonating through the silent room. I am a woman of my word. My offer stands. I will marry you. The room erupted into a frenzy. This was the moment. The fairy tale ending. The humble single dad winning the hand of the billionaire queen. It was a headline that wrote itself. Nate looked not at the cameras, but at her. He saw the defiance in her eyes, the way she was holding herself together with sheer force of will. She was honoring the rules of her game, but she was still hiding inside her fortress. Marrying him wasn't a surrender. It was the final wall going up a transaction to end the whole affair. He leaned into his microphone, and a hush fell over the room. Ms. Reyes. He began, his voice calm and steady, a quiet island in the sea of chaos. I thank you for the honor of the game. It was one of the greatest I have ever had the privilege to play. He paused, letting the silence stretch. But I cannot accept your offer of marriage. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a sound of pure shock. Reporters looked at each other, bewildered. Cassandra's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. This was not a move she had calculated. This was an anomaly that broke the entire system. Nate continued, his gaze locked with hers, speaking to her as if they were the only two people in the room. Marriage is not a prize to be won at the end of a tournament, Ms. Reyes. A human heart isn't the king in a chess game to be captured and claimed. You offered a checkmate, a final definitive end. But I'm not looking for an end. I'm looking for an opening. He saw a flicker of confusion, of genuine, unguarded emotion in her eyes. He pressed on. You've built a magnificent fortress around yourself. This challenge, this grand spectacle, it was another wall, wasn't it? The highest one yet. I have no interest in marrying a fortress. He stood up his chair, scraping softly against the floor. The cameras followed his every move. So I must respectfully decline your proposal. He let that hang in the air for a moment, the final shocking twist. But I will make you a counteroffer. The entire world was listening now. Peterson looked like he was about to have a security detail tackle Nate. Forget the cameras, forget the titles, forget the prize. Have dinner with me, not as Cassandra Reyes, CEO of Ethelred Innovations, and not as the man who beat you at chess, just as Cassandra and Nate. Come to my home in Brooklyn. Meet my daughter. See how a different game is played, one without a board or a clock. He gave a small, sad smile. And after that, if you still believe a marriage contract is the only move you have left to make, then I will walk away and you'll never hear from me again. But I'm betting you're a better player than that. Without another word, he turned and walked off the stage, leaving behind a scene of absolute pandemonium. He didn't look back. He had made his move. He had refused to capture her king, and had instead invited her queen to step off the board entirely. Cassandra sat frozen at the table, the roar of the press a distant hum. Every instinct, every bit of training, every defense mechanism she had screamed at her to dismiss him as an arrogant fool. Peterson was already at her side, whispering furiously, "We're leaving. I'll have him escorted out. We'll release a statement." But she couldn't move. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever seen through the layers of power and wealth to the person cowering inside. Men wanted her company, her money, her name. They wanted to conquer her. This man, this quiet father from Brooklyn, had looked at her and seen a prisoner, and instead of claiming the prize he had offered her a key. "No," she said softly, stunning Peterson into silence. "Don't release a statement. Get me an address." The game wasn't over. It had just begun. 3 days later, a sleek, black town car so out of place it might as well have been a spaceship pulled up in front of Nate's unassuming brownstone in Brooklyn. Cassandra sat in the back, her hands clenched in her lap. She had changed her outfit 3 times, finally settling on a pair of simple dark trousers and a silk blouse, her attempt at casual. She felt more nervous than she had before any billion-dollar acquisition meeting. Peterson had been apoplectic. "You cannot go to this man's home. It's an unacceptable security risk. We know nothing about him other than the fact that he's a ghost. He lived completely off the grid for 10 years. "You know he has a daughter, Robert," she had replied coolly. "That tells me more than your background check ever could." She had accepted Nate's counteroffer via a terse email from her assistant. He had replied with only an address and a time. No fanfare, no follow-up. The simplicity of it was both unnerving and intriguing. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car, instructing the driver to wait. She walked up the 3 flights of stairs, the scent of garlic and laundry soap replacing the sterile air of her penthouse. She knocked on apartment 3B. Nate opened the door. He was wearing jeans and an old t-shirt that said, "Brooklyn Public Library." He looked normal, tired but with a gentle warmth in his eyes she hadn't seen during the match. "You came," he said, a small smile touching his lips. "I'm not one to decline a challenge, Mr. Coleman." "It's Nate," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "And this isn't a challenge. It's just dinner." The apartment was small but clean and filled with a lived-in warmth that felt utterly alien to her. Books overflowed from shelves, Zoe's colourful drawings were taped to the walls, and a half-finished Lego castle sat on the coffee table. The air smelled of roasting chicken. It smelled like a home. "Zoe," Nate called. "Our guest is here," a small girl with a cloud of curly brown hair, and Nate's thoughtful eyes peered out from the hallway. She was holding a well-loved stuffed rabbit. "Hello," Cassandra said, her voice softer than she intended. "Hi," Zoe said shyly. "Are you the lady my daddy beat in chess?" Nate winced. "Zoe," Cassandra laughed, a real, genuine laugh that surprised even herself. "Yes, I am. Your daddy is a very smart man." "He's the smartest," Zoe agreed, her shyness evaporating. "He helps me with my math homework, and he can build a Lego Millennium Falcon without the instructions." She beamed with pride. Dinner was a revelation. It wasn't served by staff on fine china. They ate at a small wooden table in the kitchen. Nate served the chicken slightly overcooked on one side with roasted potatoes. Zoe chattered on about her school project, her best friend, and her theory that squirrels were secretly plotting to take over the world. Cassandra found herself simply listening. No one had talked to her like this in years. Her conversations were transactions, negotiations, strategic alignments. This was just life. Nate would ask Zoe questions, gently steering the conversation, his attention fully on his daughter. Cassandra watched the easy affection between them, the inside jokes, the way he knew exactly how to cut her food. It was a perfectly synchronized 2-person ballet of love and care. After dinner, Zoe insisted on showing Cassandra her room. It was a tiny space, painted a bright yellow with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Zoe proudly pointed out her rock collection and her bookshelf, which was filled with adventure stories. "Daddy reads to me every night," Zoe said, climbing onto her bed. "Even when he's really tired from work." She looked at Cassandra with startlingly perceptive eyes. You look tired too, like in your picture on the news. The innocent observation struck Cassandra with the force of a physical blow. I suppose I am, she admitted. Later, after Zoe was tucked into bed, Nate and Cassandra sat in the quiet living room, the city lights twinkling through the window. She's incredible, Cassandra said softly. She's my whole world, Nate replied, his voice thick with emotion. He hesitated, then decided to be honest. Cassandra, why did you really issue the challenge? She looked away toward the Lego castle. My husband, Daniel. Chess was our language. It was how we connected, how we argued, how we loved. When he died, the silence was absolute. I thought if I could find someone who spoke that language, maybe the silence wouldn't be so loud. I didn't want a husband. I wanted an echo. And what you found was me, Nate said gently. I found someone who refused to be an echo, someone who changed the game. She finally looked at him, her defenses completely gone. Why did you stop playing Nate Peterson's report, said you were a prodigy? The ghost of Greenwich Village. You were on track to be a grandmaster. And then you just disappeared. Nate's expression grew shadowed. It's complicated. The chess world, it can be beautiful, but it can also be ugly. I saw something I shouldn't have, a cheating scandal at a high level involving a mentor of mine. I tried to expose it, but they closed ranks. They threatened to ruin me, to blacklist me. At the same time, Zoe's mother left. I had a choice fight, a losing battle in a world I was starting to hate, or raise my daughter. It wasn't a choice. He had sacrificed his career for his integrity and his child. He hadn't run from a fight. He'd chosen a more important one. Suddenly Cassandra understood. His quiet strength wasn't passivity. It was a deep, powerful core of honor. He had given up everything the world told him he should want for something that truly mattered. An easy silence settled between them, no longer empty, but filled with a new, fragile understanding. Your chicken, she said, a small smile playing on her lips, was a little dry. Nate chuckled, the sound filling the small apartment. Noted. Next time I'll order pizza. Next time. The words hung in the air, a promise of a new opening, a game that was just getting started. The dinner in Brooklyn became a fault line in Cassandra's life, dividing everything into a before and an after. The before was a world of sterile boardrooms, silent penthouses, and calculated moves. The after was filled with the surprising warmth of Nate's small apartment, the sound of Zoe's laughter, and the unnerving, thrilling feeling of being completely, utterly unguarded. They started seeing each other regularly. They met for coffee in tiny, out-of-the-way cafes. They walked through Central Park on a crisp autumn afternoon, Zoe running ahead to chase pigeons. For the first time, Cassandra was seeing New York, not from the insulated bubble of a town car, but from the ground, as a living, breathing city. Nate showed her his world, and in doing so, he showed her a part of herself she thought had died with Daniel. The media, of course, was in a frenzy. Paparazzi followed them, and tabloids ran wild with speculation. "The Queen and the Commoner," one headline screamed. Cassandra, who had once meticulously controlled her public image, found she simply didn't care. She instructed her PR team to issue a simple no comment to all inquiries. Her world had shrunk to 2 people, and she was fiercely protective of it. But the outside world could not be held at bay forever. The twist came, as it often does, from a place of perceived loyalty. Robert Peterson, unable to accept Cassandra's newfound happiness, which he saw as a dangerous vulnerability, had continued digging into Nate's past. He became obsessed with the cheating scandal Nate had mentioned, convinced it was the key to exposing him as a fraud. He finally found what he was looking for. The man Nate had accused, a powerful and respected Russian grandmaster named Anton Volkov. Peterson arranged a meeting presenting Cassandra with a file. "I have definitive proof," he said, his voice grim. "Coleman wasn't a whistleblower. He was the one cheating. Volkov was his mentor and caught him. Coleman tried to turn it around and accuse Volkov to save his own skin. He was disgraced and ran away. He's a liar, Cassandra. He's been playing you this whole time." The file contained sworn affidavits, old tournament records, with suspicious statistical anomalies, and a personal letter from Volkov detailing Nate's betrayal. It was a convincing, damning narrative. Cassandra felt the blood drain from her face. The old walls, the fortress, slammed back into place. The cold, calculating CEO resurfaced. "Thank you, Robert. I'll handle this." That evening, she met Nate at a restaurant. She was cool, distant. She didn't mention the file, but instead steered the conversation toward the future. "The stipend you received," she said, her voice businesslike. "It's a fraction of what Zoe's treatments will cost long term. I've set up a trust for her. It will cover all her medical and educational expenses. For life." Nate stared at her, confused by her sudden shift in tone. "Cassandra, that's incredibly generous, but you don't have to do that." "I do," she said, her voice sharp. "I consider it a severance for services rendered. You played an excellent game, Mr. Coleman. But the game is now over." The pain and confusion in his eyes were like a physical blow, but she held her ground. He had lied. He had manipulated her. The fortress was the only safe place to be. "I don't understand," he said, his voice quiet. "I think you do. It was a good story. The noble single father. But I've learned the truth about why you really left the chess world." She slid the file across the table. "My security chief is very thorough." Nate opened the folder. He saw Volkov's name, and his face went pale. He read the fabricated statements, the twisted data. He looked up at her, and his expression wasn't one of guilt, but of profound, heartbreaking disappointment. "And you believe this?" he asked softly. "After everything, after the dinners, the walks in the park, after meeting my daughter. You believe this? The evidence is compelling," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Nate closed the folder and pushed it back toward her. He stood up from the table. "You know, the hardest part of that whole affair wasn't being blacklisted. It was seeing a man I admired, a genius, choose corruption over honor. It broke something in me. I never thought I'd feel that same disappointment again." He looked at her, his gaze stripping away her titles, her wealth leaving only the lonely woman he'd first seen on TV. "You're still in that fortress, Cassandra. I thought you'd found the door, but you've just reinforced the walls. Goodbye." He walked out of the restaurant, leaving her alone with the file of lies and the crushing weight of her own mistrust. For 2 days, Cassandra was a ghost in her own life. She went to meetings, she signed papers, but she was hollow. Nate's words echoed in her mind. "You believe this?" The question haunted her. Had she been so quick to believe the worst? Because it was easier. Because a world of predators and liars was familiar territory, a game she knew how to play. A world with a decent, honorable man who just wanted to have dinner was terrifyingly new. On the 3rd day, she did something the old Cassandra never would have. She acted on a hunch, on a feeling. She called her head of technology. "I want you to analyze the data in this file, the statistical anomalies in Coleman's tournament records. Run a deep forensic analysis, and get me everything you can on Grandmaster Anton Volkov, specifically his financial records from 10 years ago." The results came back within hours. The data proving Nate's cheating was a clumsy forgery easily detectable with modern algorithms, and Volkov's financial records showed a series of large, untraceable cash deposits right after Nate left the chess world. He had been paid for his silence. Peterson hadn't just found a story. He, or someone he'd contracted, had helped create one twisting the truth to fit the narrative he wanted. The realization hit her. Nate was telling the truth. He had sacrificed everything for his honor, and she had thrown it back in his face because she was a coward. She didn't call. She didn't send a car. She took the subway to Brooklyn herself. It was late, and a light rain was falling. She stood outside his brownstone, soaked and shivering, and buzzed apartment 3B. When Nate opened the door, his face was a mask of exhaustion and pain. Cassandra was all he could say. I was wrong. She choked out tears mixing with the rain on her face. I was a fool. I saw the evidence and I chose the fortress. I'm so sorry, Nate. I let my fear make the move for me. He looked at her, standing on his doorstep, like a drenched cat, the all-powerful CEO stripped of all her armor. He saw the genuine remorse in her eyes. He stepped aside. Come in. You'll catch a cold. Inside, she told him everything, about the new analysis, about how she had let Peterson's cynicism poison her, about how afraid she was of being happy. I fired him, she finished softly. Robert. He thought he was protecting me, but he was just protecting the fortress. Nate listened patiently. When she was done, he simply went to the kitchen and came back with a towel and a mug of tea. Your husband, he said, his voice gentle. He must have been a remarkable man. Cassandra looked up, surprised. He was. He would have wanted you to be happy. He wouldn't have wanted you to live in a mausoleum, even if it was built in his honor. He sat down across from her. You and I. We started this with a game that has a winner and a loser. Maybe it's time we started a different one. One where both players win. She looked at him at his kind, steady eyes. He wasn't the ghost of Greenwich Village or the man who beat her at chess. He was Nate, a good father, an honorable man, her friend. Maybe she realized with a surge of hope something more. A few weeks later, they were sitting on a bench in Washington Square Park, watching the chess players. Zoe was chasing a dog nearby. You know, Cassandra said, leaning her head on his shoulder. My proclamation was very specific. Beat me in chess and I'll marry you. Nate smiled. And I very specifically declined. True, she said, a playful glint in her eye. She turned to face him. But it never said anything about what happens if the CEO asks the single dad. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside wasn't a ring. It was a single, beautifully carved white chess piece, a king. Nathaniel Coleman. She said, her voice full of a warmth he'd never heard before. You are the kindest, most honorable man I have ever met. You taught me how to play a new game. Will you be my partner in life, in love, in everything? Will you marry me? Nate looked from the chess piece to her hopeful, vulnerable face, then over to his daughter who was laughing with pure joy, his whole world right there in one perfect picture. This wasn't a checkmate. It wasn't a prize or a contract. It was an opening move in a game that would last a lifetime. Yes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, absolutely. And so the story that began with a queen's audacious challenge found its ending not in a checkmate, but in a quiet promise in a sunlit park. Cassandra and Nate's journey reminds us that the greatest fortresses we build are often the ones around our own hearts, and that sometimes it takes an unexpected challenger to show us the key. Theirs wasn't a fairy tale of a commoner winning a queen, but a real-life story of two people finding an equal partnership in the most unlikely of ways. They learned that victory isn't about capturing a king or winning a prize. It's about having the courage to step off the board and start a new game entirely. One built not on strategy and defense, but on trust, vulnerability, and love. If their incredible story moved, you please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who loves a story about second chances. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next dive into tales that touch the heart. What did you think of Nate's shocking reply? Let us know in the comments below.